Good evening and welcome to the Franchise Tag Podcast with me, your host, Freddie Hall. Welcome back, James and Johnny, to another week of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Week 13 is getting ever closer to that playoff position in January into Christmas, and it's all getting very real now for a lot of NFL teams and for us. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of great games going on at the minute. The weather's getting colder over in the US, so we're getting more of these gritty games, which is fantastic as well. To start with some quick fire news, unfortunately, Christian McCaffrey has got a PCL injury and is now headed to IR, and he is now missing the rest of his season. What a turbulent season he has had. And the 49ers, what is also another kick in the gut, is their backup running back, Jordan Mason, is also heading to IR with a high ankle sprain, which means Isaac Guerendo will be leading the running back room for the time being. I'm sure the 49ers may look out onto the free agent market and see what they can do there to sort of back up the young running back. But yeah, it's a very big shame for the 49ers. Been a turbulent season for them so far, and it's only going to get more turbulent from here on out. The former Seahawks and New York Jets safety Jamal Adams has joined the Detroit Lions, stating that they're one of the best teams at the minute, and that's why he's gone there. They've signed a few players over the weekend who are free agents to sort of reinforce their squad as they have one eye towards January in the playoff window, and hopefully doing a large push. NFC Championship game last season, now onto the Super Bowl. They would hope in January and February. Right, well, the good this evening as we start off is going to be about Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers. Now, Bryce he's coming good. I mean, there was a lot of criticism. There was a lot of negative energy around it, I suppose. Andy Dalton came in, he got dropped. It was all going a bit crazy in Carolina. I mean, they did lose over the weekend. They lost in overtime to Tampa Bay Buccaneers 26-23. But it was a close game the whole time. And I mean, if it wasn't for a fumble by Hubbard in overtime, they maybe could have gone and won it. But James, I mean, it's been a very turbulent time for Bryce in Carolina. They have had back-to-back losses, but it does feel like it's starting to come together a little bit, and there seems to be a little bit of a change in the whole mood around Bryce, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely so. I mean, the changes in coaching and obviously a lot in the positions and things around him was never really going to benefit him, and there's always a bit of a spotlight on that franchise with the owner and everything else. He's very outspoken and he sort of draws a lot of attention for the things that he does and says, and so that didn't help either. The sitting down, the benching, bringing in Andy Dalton, you have to say now looks like a good move. Yeah, it really has benefited him. And I just think as well, there seems to be a little bit more, well, at the start of the season, Young and Canales just seemed to have a little bit of friction. He was frustrated with Canales' conservative approach, but you can't really blame him for having done so based on the sort of play that was being put out onto the field. And there seemed to be a little bit of sort of like distrust between the pair. And the sort of lack of cohesion and chemistry or whatever it was really seemed to be detrimental to the on-field play for Young as well. But now it seems more that Canales has got more time to get used to him. I think he's implementing more of his style on the rest of the team, and that's helped by having Dalton in and Young sit back and observe. And there seems to be more of a trust between the two of them now. He's got a unique, quite innovative play call style, and he seems to be trusting Young's decision making a little bit more than he was doing at the start. And there are a few other things as well. I think he seems more comfortable running. He wasn't scrambling very much out. He seemed very nervous in the pocket. Now, you saw, I think in the game at the weekend, there was he scored a 10-yard touchdown. There was a 3rd and 6, I believe it was, in the second quarter, and he sort of felt the pressure coming in from his right. He took off running to his left, held the ball, dived over the goal line as he was being tackled by, I think it was Anton Winfield Jr. And, it's little things like that where you just, we weren't seeing those last season. I think it's his first rushing touchdown since, I think it was week 1. And he just seems much more comfortable. 79.2 passer rating in that game. And in that, like, I think I've got it here somewhere. Weeks 9 through 13, Young is the third highest graded quarterback in PFF, ahead of Jackson and trailing only Burrow and Herbert. So, what he's putting out there is obviously is good and is helping his team get into the positions that they need. So, arrows up for Bryce Young, and it's really good to see, because I hate these sort of first round busts and in these one season and done and benched. And you do think that there is growth time, a growth period that needs to be allowed for these young guys. And it is unfortunate, because football is a business and it is about winning, but too much pressure is put on these guys to win early. We're seeing the benefit of time. Imagine if the Bills had just given up on Josh Allen after the first season, and you're seeing the benefit of sitting a little bit from the likes of Drake May. Obviously, Pat Mahomes sat behind Alex Smith. Thank you. That's like the most basic name to remember as well. So, they do get rushed. There is a lot of pressure on them, and sometimes that in a bubble can just be very overwhelming. The price tag, everything else as well. So, I'm really pleased to see it coming together for him. He looks, back to part of the player that we saw in college that made him be that made him become that number one prospect. And I think they've benefited as well, partly from the schedule. They've ran their games really close as well, and everything that he started, it's not like they've been blown out like he was being at the start of the season. And so if he can keep a good run now for this season, for the rest of this season, I think Canales and the Panthers will be much more happy building around him in the off season, and that makes it better for the fan base and the organization as well, knowing where you are and going in and having that plan and saying, okay, this is our guy. Let's see what we can put around him, and let's see if we can improve on what was out there last year.
I personally think, Johnny, that this has all been since Munich. I think something changed in Munich, because I was in that press conference after the game, and I know I've told a story, but we saw Bryce and a lot of the players out on the Friday. Now, they weren't out drinking or anything like that. They were just going around looking at the city. Both organisations were very, very good at letting their players go and enjoy themselves in Germany. And because we sort of said this, I don't remember saying it on the pod, but we definitely say it socially. It didn't really matter if either of these teams won or lost, really, in Munich, because they're both not very, very good franchises. They're not doing very well. They could lose and go, okay, well, we were abroad, we weren't at home, etc. And then if they win, they go back feeling like conquering heroes. And in the press conference after the game, Canales was so upbeat about Young and was very much like, I've been impressed with what I've seen. I'm impressed with what I've seen. And since then, they won that game. They've lost the last two to Kansas and Tampa Bay. But it's flipped. To start the season, no touchdowns in the first 3 weeks, but 3 picks. And then in the last 3 weeks, it's been 3 touchdowns and no picks. Now, I'm not saying 3 touchdowns in 3 games is not great. We're not saying that Bryce is the finished product right now. But do you think it is sort of like that? Since then, we've seen this sort of change in the mentality, maybe, of Carolina in general as well, because it seems like the whole team, not just Bryce, has found something in Germany.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I'd love to know what happened to Bryce during the 3 weeks that he was benched, because he looks a much more mature player for, obviously the humiliation of getting benched as a former first overall pick. I think the Panthers won the next game with Andy Dalton. His future's completely up in the air. People are talking about him getting traded, for measly picks to other teams across the league. So I think that sense of, the pressure is almost off now for Bryce Young, in terms of people are considering him a bust already. It's, it's over for him in Carolina. And since he's come back, since he's got that second chance, we're like you say, his game in Munich, he's probably got better in every game he's played since then. I think in the last 2 weeks, especially, we're talking about, if there had been, a kick made or a catch made, the Panthers would have won both of those games.
And there was some spectacular catches in this game. I mean, I like for it. You got to remember, this is not a great offense, and yet
exactly. Yeah, there were a lot of drops, and I think of the last few weeks, you could make a highlights reel of all the missed catches and the throws that Bryce Young has made. I think, in this game, looking back at him, he coming up against Baker Mayfield, they looked at, I don't know, Bryce Young looks very similar to how Mayfield has been playing in terms of his ability to scramble and make plays out of the pocket. He's much more controlled and comfortable with pressure and coming up against the blitz. So yeah, I think it's all about maturity now with Bryce Young, and I think I don't want to say that he's completely cemented himself as the future. I still think the Panthers still need to win a few games, but let's consider that the Panthers have obviously it's looking likely they'll have a top 5 pick, possibly even the first overall pick. Do you take a quarterback, or do you do what the Bears did a couple of years ago to them and trade away and completely build around Bryce? That seems like the more sensible option going into 2025. So I think he's come into his own. There's obviously a lot of question marks around the rest of the team. I thought that the defense has stepped up a lot, particularly the defensive line in recent weeks. So there's some pieces there. There's some injuries, some players to come back. But if they can pick out 2 or 3 really, really top players, especially at receiver, when Thielen obviously had a great game, but he's coming towards the end of his career. Xavier Getz has been, I think, a bit part player in his first year. He'll obviously improve. But if you can get that stud player, around him, obviously Chuba Hubbard has been great this year. Jonathan Brooks coming back. This is looking like a good team in a division that is very winnable. And even, if they won this game the weekend, they could have been thinking, hang on a minute, we're technically still in with a chance of winning the South here. So I think the confidence is getting back for the Panthers, but I still think they need, if they can win at least 1 or 2 games to round up the year, I think that's a huge building block for both the player and the franchise going into next year.
Let's turn our attention to the best team in the NFL, but is actually maybe not very good. The Kansas City Chiefs are becoming a bit of a head-scratching team at the minute. They're currently 11-1. This is the bad portion of this evening, which people may be surprised about. And they're the number 1 seed in a minute, but they barely beat the Vegas Raiders 19-17, James's team, which I'm sure he'll be very keen to talk about in a moment before I get Johnny's opinion. There's a blocked field goal. There's a miscommunication on the snap that loses the game for the Raiders. And I'm just thinking that 11-1 feels very complimentary to how they're playing. This offense has not been very good this season. We have applauded the defense this year a lot. However, the defense has sort of down-ticked a little bit in the last few weeks as well. But the biggest win this season has come versus the Saints, which was 13 points differential, which was 26-13. That was in week 5. I mean, after that, it's then a 10-point difference between the 49ers in week 7. They obviously have now got a loss on the board against the Bills in week 11. What do you make of this Kansas City Chiefs team? Are you as convinced as everybody else in the NFL?
It's really interesting. They I don't think as bad as the Eagles last year, but there are similarities in terms of this is a team that have a great record, have superstar players, but not everything is clicking at the moment. And it feels like, I don't know, we've obviously talked about the 49ers being a little bit emotionally drained or physically drained. There's not the same injuries on the Chiefs, but I think they're not being, let down is probably the wrong word, but they're rookies, particularly on offensive line, the receivers, and further into the secondary, are starting to cost them games a little bit. Well, not games, but as in, it's got a great record, but they're just not convincing enough. And I think it's those sort of trenches pieces, those really important, backup players who aren't stepping up at the moment. I think this game, for the best part, the Chiefs were the better team, but suddenly in the second half, there something clicked where the offensive line was really struggling. The secondary gave up a huge play to to Tucker and Jacoby Myers. I think it was Myers who scored the touchdown early in the third. Mahomes just didn't look comfortable at all. I think he wasn't taking risks. He was, checking down on third down, and they were falling short. It seemed, time after time again when they got the ball, it just feels like nothing is clicking in the right places for the Chiefs at the moment. I mean, they're obviously still a fantastic football team because they have such a great record. They've got such a great coach. They've got such a great quarterback, but something feels a little off. And I don't know if, Andy Reid last year said that the Raiders' defeat at Christmas was the wake-up call that they needed to really boost them into gear. I wonder if, they had lost this game against the Raiders, then a similar sort of reaction may ensue. I don't know, what's going to happen, but this team, I think we've, sort of talked about, this team feels like they could get to the playoffs and lose to, a team like the Bills or the Ravens quite early on. So there are a lot of concerns for the Chiefs, but, they are the Chiefs and they can figure it out. It just feels like there's something missing. I mean, Hollywood Brown's coming back. That could be a huge, huge for them in the receiving corps. Obviously, Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy and DeAndre Hopkins aren't quite living up to what many people expected them to be in Kansas City. But times could change. But yeah, unconvincing from the Chiefs, definitely.
See, my thing is with it is that I don't think their offense is all that good. Now, we've seen that before, and they've done really well in the postseason. And I do have a theory that they don't particularly care about the whole season. It's all about postseason. For them, get the postseason, then we'll go and beat you all and win the Super Bowl yet again. Which I still don't believe I'm wrong in that. But what I'm, the defense is really good. We know that. The biggest thing we know about them is you can't run on this defense, James. They are one of the best teams in the defense. But then when you look at Mahomes, and I don't think anyone has really said it enough, but Mahomes is not playing that great this season. He is not playing great. I mean, he's one of the most sacked quarterbacks, which doesn't help with his offensive line. He's very high in interceptions. He's got 11, which puts him in the top bracket for interceptions. It's his worst of his career so far for yard per games and yards per completion. He's taken the most sacks of his career so far, but he does have the most game-winning drives, which sort of then indicates that they're having to come back from behind a lot or they're not seeing out games thoroughly enough. I mean, they're a team, obviously, you have to keep an eye on it as a division rival, but what do you think seems to be the thing in Kansas at the minute? And obviously, we'll give your Raiders props, because it does seem that there is a bogey teamish element with the Raiders and the Chiefs.
Only maybe the last couple of years. I mean, it's been a strange one because there's all the things you were saying about Mahomes have been true, and I think those things are a product of not having great pieces around him like he's being used to. He's throwing more interceptions because he's throwing a lot more from just from not looking at stats or anything else. It seems as though he's throwing a lot more like intermediate to deep balls because he's got Worthy, the speed guy there, and he's trying to hit him on these big targets and it's just not coming off. Whereas before he would be playing the safer options. I mean, still making amazing passes and complete and getting great completions and stuff. But it's just the style of play that they are having, they've been forced into playing because of injuries and stuff this time, is conducive to more interceptions and incompletions and things like that. You can't run on them, as you said, and it's been really difficult for teams all year. What the Raiders did the other day was something that not many teams have done, and I think the last guy who did it was Joe Burrow a few years ago, whereas the passes outside the numbers from Aidan O'Connell, I think he racked up a few hundred yards on them, and it was just, that's normally not where you expect to be able to hurt the Chiefs. You expect the corners and the safeties and stuff to be out and flying and batting all these passes down and making interceptions themselves. Whereas in this game against the Raiders, well, it was just a weird one because these two games that they've played against each other, this Christmas Day game last year and this Black Friday game, whether it's just short weeks or whatever it is it's not, allowed them to be the sort of team that they usually are. But again, like Johnny was saying, going into that Christmas game, or I think, sorry, it could have been yourself, going into that Christmas game last year, they hadn't been playing well. They needed that win. They needed that loss, to spark them into life, and it kicked on the back end of the year. And there could have been an element of that here. I just don't think they are the complementary balanced team that they have been in years gone by.
Do you think the loss of Pacheco for most of the year has hindered that as well? Obviously,
Yes,
he played in the game against you guys, but
yeah, he didn't play particularly well though. And again, that could just be a little bit of rust first game back and whatever. We'll see over the next couple of weeks what that is. It could be that he's rushed back and he's still carrying an injury. He just didn't look that great, and I don't think he looked. He had flashes earlier in the season. I just don't. I don't know. There's something about him for me where I just can't quite put my finger on what exactly it is. The style in which he runs in is a sort of strange one that just isn't conducive to the Dukes and to the evasive and elusiveness that you see from seen some great plays, but like Josh Jacobs for the Packers last week. He just doesn't. They're very different styles, and his is more power through everyone, and I'm just going to bowl you over and stuff. But
more of a Najee Harris type style.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but I think sometimes in the back end of the year, when you're just lost a little step because you burnt out a little bit and the juice and a cold and everything else, I don't know if that sort of thing tends to flag. It can go one way or the other. But I don't know. I mean, I was just looking at the bracket for what the playoffs are at the moment, because I'm not convinced that even if they finish in the number 1 seed, which I'm not certain they'll do still, I think the Bills have got a great chance of still catching them. Their current playoff picture looks to be playing either the Chargers or the Texans. And I wouldn't have them as nailed-on favourites to beat either of those teams at the moment. I think the worst-case scenario for them is not nailed on, not the same as years gone by. I think a week's rest could benefit them massively to get players back. Worst case scenario for them at the moment is probably playing the Chargers, you would think, because the Texans have really sort of blown cold recently.
What's funny is actually they are out of their remaining 2, 4, 5 games. Both of them, they're playing both of them. They're playing the Chargers next. Then they're at the Browns. Then they host the Texans. Then they're at the Steelers and at the Broncos at the end. That's a tough
back end.
That's a tough back end for sure. Like an unusually tough back end.
Sorry, where was Denver as well? Is that in Denver or in Kansas?
At Denver, yes.
At Denver. So
Denver at that point, that could be their playoff spot.
Yeah, it really could be. So they'll be going for. I mean, it's likely the Chiefs, if they've clinched the number 1 seed, they'll just do what they always do and sit a load of guys, and Denver will blow it out, and it'll look weird. But at the same time, if Denver blow them out, there's always a chance that the Bills could, if they don't lose any more games, jump into that number 1 seed because they'll have the head-to-head. So I don't know. I just don't look at these games, and whilst they are probably favourites for more at the moment, I can't look at Kansas and go, yeah, definitely. That if you go in and sticking a bet on or whatever, I'm not odds on every time. Too many of these games have been too close, and we can say
they're playing 4 very good defenses.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, very good.
Texans is the only defense I'm not convinced about. When you look at the other 4, though.
You have to think as well, like you think back, and if I'm not saying that it's just because they're the Chiefs, but if another team had played in a lot of these games, and some of the decisions that have gone the Chiefs' way, or the balls bounced a certain way, or whatever, the fumble against the Raiders, or whatever, a different team, these things wouldn't have gone their way. They'd have 3 or 4 losses on their slate now, and they are a very professional organization. They don't make silly mistakes like the Raiders did with the snap and everything else. But at the same time, there was a potentially, other slightly dubious calls, and you think, are they benefiting from some like slightly more favourable calls, especially at home as well, where the crowd's pretty mad and raucous and everything else. And I don't know, I don't trust them as much as I trust Buffalo or Detroit, or maybe even the Vikings at the moment. I probably trust more than Kansas to get things done in these close games and stuff. it's so weird to say because they've been so dominant and so good, and that really pains me to say as well, obviously. But I don't. This season, this isn't going to end how they want it to end. I don't think. I can quite easily see this as like I said when we were chatting earlier on. This could just quite easily be a one and done in the playoffs, and I don't know. I don't know where you go from there. They've got some. Where do you go with Kelsey after this season? Their other tight ends have stepped up at times, but drop passes again as well. I haven't been anywhere near as consistent. Will Andy Reid try and rebuild, or will he just look to do what he always does and find the odd piece here and there and slot them in and just sort of hope for the best and hope Mahomes can carry them? It does feel like it's been that way for the last few years, and it doesn't feel like something that can continue for the long term. But I don't know. Maybe Chiefs fans are happy for short-term success and see what happens afterwards, and a few question marks. I don't know. Maybe they'll benefit hugely from, like say, Hollywood Brown coming back, and things will just feel a little bit more cohesive on that offense. But he's been out for a long time. That isn't just going to. He's not just going to come back flying, you wouldn't think, straight away. He's never shown us that before, so there's no reason to think that will be the case now either. Just a lot of question marks. And I don't think teams are scared to play them like they used to be either. I think that's the thing this time around. You used to go to Kansas and you'd be like, no, I don't fancy this, especially in the winter and all that sort of stuff. Whereas now, I don't know if they have that fear factor anymore.
We hate to have to move on to this section because it is the ugly, and unfortunately it is a topic that is going to be out there for a while. But it turns to the Houston Texans linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair and his tackle and punishment on Trevor Lawrence in the Jacksonville Jaguars game. If you haven't seen it yet, I would please advise that it's not comfortable viewing. So that's just advisory thing there for you. But what basically happened was towards the end of the second quarter, Trevor Lawrence slid, of which obviously, as we know, as NFL fans, you're not allowed to be hitting them occasions. But Azeez Al-Shaair did in fact tackle him and collided quite aggressively into his helmet, jerked his neck back, completely knocked Trevor Lawrence out. He was out for the rest of the game with concussion. Mac Jones came in for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He is the former 49er and Titan, has now been suspended for 3 games. It's important to note he has issued an apology, but they are also appealing the 3 games. So I think that is a double-edged coin of that sort of thing. James, I mean, immediately, it's not what we want to see in the game. No. I feel we see it more often than we should on certain occasions, and I'm not saying that it's a targeting thing or anything like that, but I think it's a self-awareness, knowing the rules thing, and a little bit of, I understand. I haven't never played the sport, but having played sports, you've got to know when to keep a lid on things, right?
You do, and we do forget about the highly competitive nature of these guys going out there. They're really pumped, and there's a lot of pressure on them. They're earning mega money and everything else, and a lot is expected of them. Now, I don't condone what has happened here in any way. I've always been nervous about the quarterback slide. I've always thought that it can lead to too many of these instances, and I'm not for 1 second saying Trevor Lawrence was in the wrong. His slide to me looked awkward. It wasn't the control. If you watch a veteran, and I think Aaron Rodgers does this really well. One of the few things he's done well all year. But the way that he slides sort of on one side, controls his upper body, turns his shoulder, and sort of braces himself as he goes down to the ground, would negate some of these problems. Lawrence was back on his backside, sort of really in a really vulnerable position. Now, Al-Shaair was going to make the play, and I don't know. I've tried to look back at it in sort of slow motion and see, had he already committed? Was this momentum? But it was too low. Like, he wouldn't tackle there naturally. That would have been knees or below, and that's not an NFL tackle. But we know that. So I do think, as much as he can say, and his teammates and his coach can come out and defend him and stuff, it looked bad. It looked really bad, and I'm surprised that the ban is only 3 games. I mean, NFL Vice President of Football Operations John Runyon. I don't know if you've seen any of this statement, so I'll just quickly read a little bit of this to you, because I think he sums it up quite well. And it's not just, also, I think, for context, about the hit. It's about the aftermath of the hit as well, and everything that preceded it. So after the hit, you proceeded to engage in a brawl, which you escalated when you pulled an opponent down to the ground by his face mask. After the referee announced that you were disqualified for the hit and your unsportsmanlike acts, you removed your helmet and re-engaged with your opponent while walking down and across the field, which started another physical confrontation in the end zone. Your lack of sportsmanship and respect for the game of football and all those who play, coach, and enjoy watching it is troubling and does not reflect the core values of the NFL. Your continued disregard for NFL playing rules puts the health and safety of both you and your opponents in jeopardy and will not be tolerated. Now, part of this harks back to week 2 as well. And I don't know if you remember this, but when they played the Bears, he was really late pushing Caleb Williams out on the sideline. As he was rushing out of bounds, had given himself up, and then the team got involved, and he then hit running back Roschon Johnson in the face mask and was issued an $11,000+ fine for the play. So he's got previous, and that's part of why this 3-game suspension is what it is. I think they can appeal it all they want, but I can't.
Do you think they
see
should
it being
appeal it?
tolerated. No.
Do you think that looks good? Because I don't think that's a great look. Myself, no. I think appealing means that you don't think you're in the wrong.
D'Amico Ryans,
that's how I take from that.
Yeah, D'Amico Ryans has spoke about it and said that obviously it was unfortunate, and it's twofold. And this is sort of made me think about the slides. The quarterbacks, they try to gain an advantage of the rules with the slide, get extra yards and everything else. And he was basically trying to defend what happened by saying somewhere, if the guy's going to slide, if he slides late, and you've already committed and everything. And I know we've seen as well, was it Kenny Pickett did the fake slide, went to slide, and obviously that set a bad precedent, and that was dangerous, because you if you go down and you give yourself up, more often than not, the opposition know that you're vulnerable, that play's dead, and you call that game over. Kenny Pickett set a bit of a dangerous precedent by doing that, for defenders especially, because their job is to stop you from gaining momentum. That is their entire job, and if they don't do that and don't do that well, that can cost them their career. If they're already sort of a bit questionable or a player on the fringes. So I'm not putting a whole lot of blame on him, but the defenders have had to change the way they think about this sort of sliding process that the quarterbacks are committing to. I think they need to learn to do it better. They need to go more of the Rodgers approach and protect themselves.
Kyler Murray is
he's brilliant at it.
Yeah, he's former baseball
background. Yeah, Mahomes is good at it as well. Again, former baseball background, and that does change things. The blame is on Al-Shaair completely. He shouldn't have done it. I do feel sorry for Trevor Lawrence in the injury and everything else. He could have protecting himself better, and I think he'll look back at that, and his coaches will look back at that, and that will be a learning curve for the rest of the season and the off season for him as well. I hope he recovers quickly and the damage isn't too serious. But we're yet
to hear yet what that extent of that will be, whether he'll be playing this weekend coming or not. But when we look at the Texans, Johnny, they're in desperate need of keeping their best players on the pitch. And Al-Shaair is a very good linebacker, has been a good linebacker for a long time now. And, he's going to miss, he's going to not be back till January now. That's against the Titans. He's going to miss games against the Dolphins, Chiefs, and Ravens. His Texans team at 8-5 with the Colts and their tail at 6-7. They're looking to make a good push into the playoffs. How much is it going to impact the team?
Yeah, I think it's Definitely, I completely agree. I think Al-Shaair is a very valuable player for them. I mean, I agree with. I think the suspension is deserved, and I think the NFL. Nick Serio, the Texans GM, came out today and said, he felt that the NFL's decision was embarrassing. But I do think what he said about consistency and suspending players, that is something that I think the NFL needs to clamp down in terms of law changes. But back to the GM Caserio sort of comments, he was very clearly fired up, I suppose, in terms of very disgruntled about this decision, because he knows how big a moment this could be for the Texans season, losing a star player on what is already a pretty weakened defense. The Texans generally, I think, this season have regressed from our sort of expectations. We haven't seen CJ Stroud. Obviously, he was so good last year. We haven't seen him take that leap in terms of into like the top three quarterbacks that we all sort of expected. And I feel the team as a whole, is we lean on those sort of expectations of Stroud, and they reflect very, very generally about the team and how they've performed this year. I mean, they're obviously, I think still massive favourites to go on and win their division. So, a playoff berth is there for them, and whether or not that, if Al-Shaair, if players like him can get back for, he would be back, before the playoffs. So they have to find something, I think, in the next few weeks on both sides of the ball to really, convince people that they are a genuine threat. But I don't know. They're a team that are sort of on the down when a lot of the teams around them, like the Broncos, the Chargers, are on the up. And if there was a playoff game between the Chargers, for example, against the Texans, I think talking with a lot of even with us three, I think we'd struggle to pick one of us to pick the Texans at the moment. So concerning times, and this obviously adds a lot more fuel to the fire in terms of their sort of demise at the end of the season.
We move on to our final section of this evening, which is the hot seat and cold throne portion. Usually me and Johnny put one out there, and James picks the one that he thinks is the best, I suppose. I ain't going to lie, mine are well left field tonight. Mine are, one of them's really, really left field and a bit tongue-in-cheek and taking the mick, really. I'm going to open up the hot seat tonight. So the hot seat, I think, in a minute has got to be the Bengals defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo. This defense has been a shambles all season. Lose 43-38 to the Steelers. They put up so many points, and yet they gave up so many points. I mean, Dan Pitcher, the offensive coordinator, and Zach Taylor are pulling their hair out. I mean, there is a lot of hot seat talk about Zach Taylor. I agree on that. But I also think no one's really talking about his defensive coordinator and how bad this defense has been. Very worrying times. Very, very worrying times. This was a top defense. What's going on, Lou? On to you, Johnny.
Okay, I will go for Mr. Brian Daboll of the New York Giants. It's been a car crash. I don't think we've mentioned Daboll in these hot seats yet, but certainly some of the players from the New York Giants franchise. But it's obviously been a car crash of a year for the Giants. They lost again to another weakened franchise in the Dallas Cowboys. It's been such a roller coaster for Daboll in New York. He led the team to the playoffs. He looked so good, winning the Coach of the Year, and it's really fallen off. I think his seat is very much burning. He hasn't got a quarterback. He's got lots of injured players around him, and the draft classes from the last couple of years have failed to step up. So a lot to work on for the Giants, and I think it ultimately starts with the head coach being fired at the end of this year.
Oh, James, which one? I mean, I think for Daboll's an obvious one. I'll be honest with you. I think Lou is not so obvious.
Well, I didn't know if you're going to ask me for a couple this evening.
You can give one if you like.
I can't because you've already taken mine because I had Lou Anarumo as well.
No way! So that means I win.
think by default, yeah, it kind of does. I'm completely with you about where the Bengals are at the moment, and it's a really difficult one with Zach Taylor because offensively they've been brilliant, defensively they've been terrible. Should he have seen this in the offseason? Should he have maybe? But then Lou Anarumo have been solid. Had they done enough? It's going to be difficult to keep Anarumo around, I think, and I think that will be what saves Taylor's job. As for Brian Daboll, I don't think anything can save his job, unfortunately. So, unless he's got some serious dirt on the Maras somewhere that he can just whip out a little file and be like, "No, I'm not going anywhere," I think he's about cooked.
Wow, that means I win this one. We'll go on to the cold throne. Who is sitting on that icy seat for you this week, Johnny?
I've got a little bit left field with this one. It's probably a name that a lot of people have started to hear about as the season has gone on, but not necessarily at the start of the year. It's the Philadelphia Eagles linebacker, Zach Bourne, who I think is becoming one of the best defensive players in the league. He is, very left field sharp for Defensive Player of the Year, but he is someone who is just absolutely everywhere. And with a couple of sacks against the Ravens this weekend, has really sort of put himself up there as a player who will get a lot of attention in free agency. He only signed a 1-year deal with the Eagles this season, and for a team like the Bengals who need a bit of a superstar on their roster, he's someone I think who's going to make a ton of money. Yeah, Vic Fangio's done an awesome job with this Eagles, probably the best in the league at the moment. Props are going to the two young quarterbacks and the defensive line, but I think Zach Bourne has been the absolute player that they've been craving for the last couple of years in this season so far.
Very good. Mine's a little bit of an apology at the same time, I suppose. So as you know, I do the Monday show, and we have been fairly critical of the Monday night games for the last few weeks. I have to admit, whoever's been scheduling these Monday night games needs to be crowned with a nice icy cold throne, because they have had 2 back-to-back huge weeks of fantastic games. We always joke about I never stay up for the Monday night games, but the Ravens Chargers, definitely a game to stay up for. The Broncos Browns, not a game to stay up for necessarily, but 41-32. It's like they knew it was going to be a huge game. I'm sorry for whoever does the NFL scheduling. You've done really well the last few weeks. I hope this continues.
I can't believe we predicted that to be the biggest defensive masterclass from both teams.
It's absolute rubbish yesterday, and luckily it doesn't get clipped up and put out because we can't get the turnaround time, unfortunately. But we both said that it would be, what was it in the end? You said 17. You said
16-12. I predicted to the Broncos.
Oh, wow.
I said 2017, didn't I?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, ridiculous.
It's funny because I saw what was the perfect fantasy lineup today, and I'm sure Jameis Winston is the quarterback, but the Broncos defense is the highest playing defense. Oh, what the hell was this game? What are we even doing? Oh, well, if I have to pick, then Johnny is going to win this one, mostly because on my option I had Big Vic. So I had Lou Anarumo, I had double defensive coordinators, one on the hot seat, one on the cold seat, and I think the Eagles' defense has been amazing. And I really sort of was worried for them at the start of the year, the names that they had, and you just thought, good in the trenches, but suspect at the linebacker and at cornerback and everything as well. And everybody stepped up. And again, it's part of the Fangio system and all that sort of stuff. And it's just him doing an amazing job again. So nice steady tie to round out the evening.
Oh, don't we all hate ties? We're NFL fans. We hate a tie. Thank you, James. Thank you, Johnny, for joining me this evening. Thank you for watching on YouTube or any of our social media platforms. Our clips will be out of this show later on in the week. We also have the college show and betting show coming to you in the week, which you should be definitely watching. Make sure you keep liking and subscribing on YouTube and following us on social media. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you all again very soon.